Thanks to MoAD and to Elizabeth Gessel, to Emily Coleman, and to Elena Gross for the invitation to be here with David. And thanks to David for picking me to be in conversation with. Congratulations on the exhibition. It's huge. And it's a gorgeous show. And for people who haven't seen it yet, I really want to encourage you to see it. I had been posting about tonight. And I said a couple of things in the post. One was that this is the largest exhibition of your work to date, and something that people don't want to miss because it's such a gift to have all of this work collected. And I also said that you're one of my all-time favorite artists, which came out totally organically. It was like, David Huffman's my all-time, he's the all-time great. So I wanted to actually start by saying why. Why do I think why are you one of my all-time favorite artists? So
you want me to tell you one?
I'm sure you would.
Sorry.
I have a list, but if I miss something, you have the floor. So just some of my notes about this. I appreciate your narrative approach to art making, particularly the works that are in the show. You do a lot of different kinds of work, and so I don't want to limit you by saying it's all narrative, but this work really, I think, shows the strength of the narrative and the storytelling aspect of your work. As a historian, I love the historical dimension of your work. You clearly love history and Black history in particular. That comes through, your love of history comes through. The combination of the abstract and the figurative in all of your compositions is something I really love. There's also careful and thoughtful selection and use of color and texture in your work, I think, to a maximal effect. And I also think that there's a generous sense of wonder and humor that you offer to all of us. Did I miss anything that you want to add about why I love your work?
List.
Yeah, it's a good list. But I mean, all of those things are here in the work, I think, in each composition and then as a show overall. So tonight I'd really like to just look at your work together and ask you to speak about the development of some of these aspects of your work and ideas in your journey as an artist. So we're not going back to the beginning, but we are going to see some older work that no one has seen in many years if they've seen it at all. I can turn this if you want to see it, yeah. So this is just an installation shot of the opening of the show, particularly for people at home. And then I am going back to the 90s, which is a while ago now. And I wanted people to see where some of these ideas started for you at that point. If you could have several paintings from this era. This one's called Ogun from around 1996. If you could just talk to us about some of the concerns you had when you were starting to make this work.
Well, I just want to thank MoAD for putting on this exhibition. Its work was in storage for so long, and all the right things are occurring for this work to be presented. So being presented here to me is really important, and then having you connected to it, because we've done work in relation to this work, going back to the Day Museum when we did Dark Matter.
And I forget what year that was, but I worked with Karen Kinzel at the Day Museum to present a show of David's work, which was in probably 2005.
Probably, yeah. And so where it's at now, it's, it's kind of like this show is like a map of this body of work, starting from my thesis that I had constructed in my grad program at CCAC, and it was called The Trauma Smile. And so it has a lot of work connected to that, and then it evolved into the figures and doing the robots, and then the UFOs, and then ultimately to the astronauts, which I call Traumanauts, and they're basically a parallel narrative that I approached by looking at a lot of science fiction films are reflecting on ones that I had seen previously, and then also the Apollo space program. So there's a lot of things in tandem that helped that work come about. So it's really, when I say map, that means that there's several locations, several bodies of work within the body of work. That makes it kind of tricky because there's really not a sense of continuity per se in the show, because the fact that it's so sci-fi and it's so, you know, otherworldly in the sense that they all work well together, you know, whether they be one piece earlier than the other. Now, getting back to this early piece that you mentioned here, which was a body of work that I had started when I was living in Los Angeles, and you can see that this is a mixed media piece. It's mostly enamel and acrylic and collage. I was definitely really interested in African American history when it came to religion, and thinking about, you know, Haitian religions and things that were hybrids, you know, which was actually happening in New York and different parts of the country. And so I was looking at things like angels and hybrid Christianity that had like African deities and so on, and that's why I call this Ogun, you know, and then you see the cross in it. So there's not a lot of strategy in a sense of like, I want to make a damn great painting, you know, I'm after art, I'm after a compelling moment, and so the content is generally the direction of getting something started, but you know, I'm just trying to make a painting I'd never seen before. You can see how everything is generally abstract in the background. There's a lot of layering. But then you have these figures. So the figure came about looking at blackface, kind of Americana imagery, stereotype imagery of black folks. They have a jarring effect when you first look at them as African American. You know, these were horrific reflections, you know, like why would anybody make people look like this? And on top of it, all the black folks seemed like in the 19th century were just happy to be in servitude, which is a contradiction of any human self-preservation. It's not true. And when I got into my grad program at CCA, I leaned toward looking at the Grand as a contradictory countenance that really was probably based more on PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, than it was about joy and being happy.
I put this in here, David, just to show the type of objects you're talking about that influenced you at the time. So two different things. So this Black Americana cloth that you see, you know, which is part of this derogatory imagery that you're talking about. And then I pulled in the Tanner, the banjo lesson. I mean, that's a beautiful painting. It's a beautiful painting.
It's a beautiful painting.
In this context, it's a great ancestor to what your interests were. You know, thinking about Tanner looking at this work also, and then being inspired to bring some truth into the image.
You know, it's weird to take on a traumatic stereotype image that's supposed to reflect your own personal self in a really bad way, and to create a protagonist out of that. It seems almost like self-abuse, you know. But I was just compelled to look at that, and it's strange enough, there were a few other artists looking at, you know, that idea in their way, like Kara Walker was just starting her work, and like Michael Ray Charles, I don't know if anyone knows his work, but he was doing like board game related scenarios with, you know, the happy darky kind of concept. And, you know, I was in LA, he was in Texas. Kara, I forget exactly, she came out of Sacramento, but eventually...
She was from Stockton, and then she went to Georgia, and then New York,
New York, exactly. And so there wasn't a ton of us utilizing this kind of imagery, and at first, you know, when people see it, you know, when black folks saw it, I was like, whoa, like, what the hell is... I mean, sorry, what was that? That's unusual. And so... I guess it was kind of like I had to speculate on it through the painting, and as I was making them, I started looking at other artists making some kind of strategic interventions on their own. Like Fred Wilson made this famous, or I think it's a famous video of him breaking the figurines, smashing them with a hammer. And when I first saw it, I was like, man, those things they're worth some money. You sure you want to break all these? And it was like, no, you got to get rid of it. You not so much get rid of it. It's cathartic to destroy them, because in a way, when slavery ruptured the continuity of African life, the healing didn't occur, you know, and so we have to take on the role of healing ourselves. We don't have a method like in psychology to have these topical ways to heal. We have to like conjure up our own sensibility to do that ourselves. So for me, this became kind of a healing project to first cite it and then dismantle it, and in some way, and at the same time to release it. And I felt like I needed to make the paintings beautiful too, in a certain way, because I guess in a way, well, maybe not so much beautiful, but that I'm interested in the aesthetic experience.
But they are interesting to look at. I mean,
That's a nice painting.
You're really great with the layering. I mean, going back to one of the things I love in terms of color and texture. I mean, all of those things are there. So even though you might be repulsed by that myth, right? There's still something that draws you to the work.
Definitely, and I was drawn to this preoccupation of blackness in this way that white people had to build and make and keep in their homes and to use in advertising. And it's almost like by the time Al Jolson came out with his famous blackface interpretations, it was like, what is with white folks and black? It's like they wanted to be black the whole time, you know? It's almost like they saw their joy in it in a certain way. It was a very contradictory, kind of like a hodgepodge of various things.
Yeah, this idea of love and theft, you know, admiring and hating something at the same time. And that, maybe that's part of what the viewer is doing, finding something that they are interested in and something that they're...
It's, you know, artists, it's a strange, contradictory interest. I would not have chosen, I mean, obviously I made these paintings, but I actually wasn't after them. I wasn't looking for them. And I think...
Well, what does that mean? They came back... where'd they come from then?
I think art chooses the artist.
Okay.
In that, I don't really feel like I have so much power over all the art that I make as I am brought to the attention of what needs to occur there that has my particular ability to allow it to come about.
Okay.
And so I might have all kinds of other aesthetic desires, but to me art's bigger than that. So it's bigger than my taste and my likes and my choices. There's this current that I feel like artists capture. And in spite of themselves, they have to either attend to it or be withdrawn from it, you know. So it's a risky thing, becoming an artist. It isn't always completely satisfying in a way that you can control the outcome. You have to always find it. Like, at least for me, I'm finding what I can do and what the painting possibilities are. You know, I'm always kind of like slightly on the edge.
Well, let's talk more about that. I mean, that's really interesting, because then I think about, well, what are your influences? You know, what are the things that are already inside you that you're keen on, that have made a mark, that create that kind of pool, right, for something to then come out. So I'm just going to show some more. We have a lot of slides.
Well, trauma obviously was part of this whole scenario.
Trauma, trauma smile leading up to the Traumanaut, we're seeing it in the 90s.
And that's before. So I was doing that when I was in LA.
Okay.
It's probably like 90, what does it say, 94?
94.
Yeah.
So what were you doing in LA? You went to school here, right?
Just living.
All right.
You know.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be in business. I was just like,
you're supposed to be here in LA. No, I mean, my sister lived there.
Okay.
And so I wanted...
You don't have to tell me. I was like, was there an art job or an art show or
It was
a
like
studio
change of
or-
pace,
Okay.
you know, and... But it was a great place because I met a lot of people, and one place that was super influential was Isawan Books.
Yeah, in Lamert Park.
It wasn't in Lamert yet. It was
on La Brea.
It wasn't on La Brea
It
yet.
wasn't?
This was its first location was, I don't even remember the street.
Okay.
But it almost looked like it was in someone's house. It was a really small closet.
Okay.
And you can go upstairs to the really deep books, but I kind of went halfway up the stairs and came back down because they had some heavy stuff to read up there.
I've been going there for a long time. I don't know this original spot. I'll talk to them about.
Yeah, ask them about it. But they had all this great stuff on African American history and African history, written by scholars that I had never heard of, like Sheikh Anta Diop, or Jackson or Granger. It just like they just had all this amazing stuff, and so I had this friend who was really into that, and he turned me on to it. We went to the bookstore, and I was knocked out. Especially Sheikh Anta Diop, because this guy was an anthropologist from Senegal who spoke like 16 languages, and he actually worked with Dr. Leakey, and he worked at the British Museum, and he just laid out so much of the missing parts of African history in such a way that it was so refreshing, and so it just brightened me up, and I think it set me on a course of just like excitement, So when I did this piece, like this is history lesson, I did a series of history lesson pieces on cardboard boxes that were like refrigerator boxes or something, and they were laid out pretty much like that. I think I did like maybe 5 of these. Okay. Yeah, that's the only one I still have.
So this is big then, a refrigerator box?
Yeah, it's about maybe 6.5 feet, not too. And for me, it was big. Yeah, I did this in my studio apartment in the kitchen, and I did a whole body of work in that space.
And there's lots of influences here. I mean, this is pretty didactic with all the different elements that are there, right? Because you've got African sculptures. Yeah. You've got a skull over here. Mm-hmm. I think this maybe makes us think of Basquiat and some of his layouts.
The Exenaut is definitely a Basquiat thing.
And on the chest, and that's like a reproduction of an Egyptian papyrus drawing. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's all kinds of influences that are here.
But it's very hieroglyphic, though, I felt, too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To put an image and put several images around it to build a narrative. I was thinking about that term, and like when you're looking at the skull has just knots for the eyes and mouth, and the knots were about the banality of, lynching knots. So it's more like, there's a lot of you just pulling out on history, just pulling history out.
Okay. This is an installation shot from the exhibition that's up right now, and I wanted people to get a sense of the variety of things that are in the exhibition, and we'll look at some of these more closely, but I love these ceramic pieces. I'm going to show this, I'll come back to this in a second, but I wanted, maybe you could start here with another one of your influences, because you're influenced by all kinds of things.
That's great, Bazinga right there. So when I was in grad school, I was already interested in like robots and sci-fi and those kind of things, and more like 50s and 60s robots. And then I remember going into a shop that was in Emeryville that had all these Japanese toys. I was an assistant to an artist in the building, and I had to pick up a package from them that was left for her. And when I went there, it was like a whole cave full of crazy anime toys and all this stuff, and it was like, some of that stuff I remember when I was really young, like Astro Boy, Gigantor and stuff, and then they had like some of these what they call super robots, which I was, I was already a teenager and past that interest, but they intrigued me, their forms, and they were called super robots. And so I think I got a few of them, not from there, but like at a flea market or something. And when I was doing drawings of my before Trauma Eve, there was like these other robots that I was coming up with, and then eventually I came up with Trauma Eve and Luxor DX. I've been painting them and drawing them and using that as a model, and then eventually decided to make one myself, and I wanted to do ceramics because I used to do a lot of ceramic sculpture. So it was really a funny thing to bring those two sensibilities together. I mean, you have this grinning countenance, which almost looks like a Joker-esque feel to it, of the characters, and then they have that super robot body, which I had to kind of like redo in order to get it to work for the molds that we had to make.
So, David, maybe this is a good time just to you talk about these characters, you know, because you're bringing, right, these figures together, these super robots, but then we were looking, you know, at these works. How do they come together in the Traumanauts? And, you know, because the narrative approach, as I said, is so important to me, but I don't know if everyone understands the whole narrative and how.
I don't even understand the whole narrative. So,
well,
I mean, well, there isn't one linear narrative. I mean, so I'm an artist making art. I'm compelled by subject matter that really interests me, and I happen to have found things in tandem that look story-like, and occasionally I will make a moment that's totally narrative, but generally I'm like excited about their form. So for me, I was trying to empower the black body. I was trying to remove the passive, powerless, happy-darky image from the Americana stuff into a directional, empowered being. And so for me, that was my main interest, and I had to find ways to get at it. And occasionally it'd be a story where the robot's accoutrements would be the moment of the scene, like a trap door would open in the back of one of the robots' head, and a UFO would go inside. And just the term UFO was also what I felt kind of like racially loaded too in some ways, that black culture is like an unidentified flying object in general ways. You know, we've been ignored just like a UFO. So it's like opportunity as well, but it wasn't like I did this and then the next chapter was that. It was rarely that way. It was more like, okay, now that I've designed this figure to do this, like for instance, once I came up with Trauma Eve 1, which was named after Eve of Adam and Eve, because I thought, how much trauma is there attributed to the human body except for Eve, right? And to have a black Eve was like double trauma, I felt. And so I wanted to subvert that and make her, to free her up, like Japanese animated figures have freed up their ability to tell their character stories. And that kind of stuff helped me rethink about how I can deliver it. So then I came up with Trauma Eve 2, which was going to be Oprah Winfrey as the pilot. So I did all these studies with Oprah in it. And I don't know, my aunt one time came to my studio one time and was very excited. She's a very supportive person. She's passed away now. Saw what I was doing, said, "What's this?" You know, I said, "Oh, this is Trauma Eve 2. This is Oprah's super robot." And she got really upset. Oh my gosh. I mean, it was like, it was the worst thing that I could have done, because Oprah, this was like, we're talking.
This is 99.
Yeah, we're talking like around 99, 98. So she's not a contemporary art collector or goes to any museums or any of that stuff. She's just a black woman who would read Ebony magazine and Jet magazine, and none of this stuff's in it. So when she saw this, she thought I was making fun of her.
I see.
And so when I felt that opposition, I was like, okay, that's the first sting that I felt when I was looking at this stuff. Totally logical. And so I had to really think about it. And then when I saw the Fred Wilson video, I thought of demolishing them in my manner too. Like, she's right. You know, I kind of need to dismantle them. Unfortunately, I didn't take the narrative further with Oprah. There's only a few pieces that I did with her. But I felt like I needed to get out of the spell of the creative space that I was in, and to also confront my original impression, you know, which is this is a psychological state of trauma. And so then but we probably don't have any images of that work, but so I started doing the tanks, where...
Yeah, we have...
Do we have any of the tanks? demolition.
Yeah, we can go forward and come back.
So, yeah, there's so much stuff.
There's a lot of stuff. Here's a tank.
We might have to pick and choose because they don't have these guys go out of snail space.
You know, okay, I will. But with the
Then I start combing my hair this way.
with the Oprah idea, just to finish that thought, I mean, your idea was to have Oprah as a pilot of one of these big trauma E2, so that these robots are big enough for people to be inside.
They're empowered by the robot.
So Oprah would have been inside, and just
Operating
in terms of scale, so people are understanding the difference.
It would be a little figure entering the back of the robot's head. They're neurologically connected to the robot, and they become at one, like a symbiotic kind of relationship.
I'll see if
But it was all about empowering the black body, and for me, Oprah was like, or is, especially back then, just kind of like a, you know, just like amazing, you know what I mean? Like Oprah was just kind of off the hook. There was nothing even close to her.
Well, still now, even though the show's not on, she's got a network. I mean,
but back then it was
Oprah, but her
show was on. You know what I mean? So it was definitely stuff that was always current.
I pulled this up
That's
just
a
because
great painting,
this
by
show.
the way, you guys.
David is the only artist I know who loves his own work so much.
Not all of it. Not all of it. No, I got
one.
work that I turn around. I thought I was going to hang it in the house, and I was like immediately had to get it out of there. But I like that painting.
Yeah.
So that's Trauma Eve, and you can see the door of her head has opened, and then there's the watermelon UFO, which is about to land inside of it. The pilot piloting the UFO will connect to the robot and operate the robot.
Can you talk a bit about, and I have some more images I can show, but since we have this up, the other things that are going on around the figure, with the innards in particular?
So my thesis subject also got me thinking about the internals of the body and how it can't lie like the grin can. You know, how the face can change, how it can act, but the body won't act with it. And so I got interested in like deteriorating organs, you know, the idea that overstress, the idea of like you could have a kind of cancer, like things can eat away at you on the inside that you're not showing because of, you know, you're giving them like, hey, everything's fine. And it just occurred to me that organs are generally, you know, an aspect of life. And so I started originally painting these as inner spaces that looked like outer space. They actually weren't in outer space, they were in a kind of nomadic space. But I was interested in the idea that these are spaces that are full of fluid and organ. Okay, so like this is the earliest one where I was really trying to connect the grin to a deteriorating inner state.
Mm-hmm. And there's a way in which you have the human body and then that relationship to this mechanical body. There's another image I can show showing Lexer DX's inside, but at some point there's that connection between a human pilot and the robot.
The robot.
Super robot.
Exactly. It's an analog robot. And I think I was also looking a lot at Philip Guston's work because I've always liked the way he uses paint and structure and form. And, you know, even though he had these like Ku Klux Klan figures, they reminded me more of like underground comic books, really. And I almost didn't see them as his. I just thought, oh, he's just kind of copying underground comic book artist work, which I had seen as a kid. But the idea that he would turn an otherwise ink kind of drawing that looks almost like laissez-faire into a like deliberate oil painting with substance and layers and, you know, color delivery, like it just was a strange combination. And it kind of like opened me up to think about how to paint these in different ways. And so I started like doing these schematics, you know, of the anatomy, like what would the anatomy be about for a robot like this. So you have, I think, the UFO in that one too. It's a saucer shape.
In this one?
No, the other one, that one. I think it's right above. I'm seeing a smaller image, that's why I'm looking. Yeah, and of course a clock, right? Because that's how they did it in the 50s. They just threw a bunch of machinery in, a wind up, and a clock. Clocks always look like it's ticking, it's alive, tick, tick, tick. Right. So, yeah, there's no real ingenuity in that. Like, don't apply that to any home devices.
I have some more pictures I wanted to show of influences in your work. Jack Kirby's work. You've been talking about comics, and I thought you might want to say a little bit more about what he was doing and how that helped your aesthetic.
So by the time I started doing the Traumanaut, and they had gone through this healing process where they are encountering moments of inner growth, and they lost that grin, you know, they no longer, it was like a healing event, you know, so that great healing event happened, and now they're just journeying like anyone else, right? They're just looking for stuff that other people need to fulfill themselves with. Thinking about the suit was very interesting because I did a lot of drawings, and then I would do things like mix two colors and then have like maybe 150 sheets of paper and just like do several drawings of these figures to a point of trying to figure out what's the best way that they need to be presented. And I think I just started leaning toward these brush strokes that kind of looked like Kirby, and then I looked at Kirby again, I was like, yeah, this is kind of like Jack Kirby, because I used to copy Jack Kirby's art a long time ago when I was really young, like, you know, in the early 70s. I've had lots of Fantastic Four books and other books that he's done a ton of stuff. Kirby is just, yeah, it's hard to explain. I mean, are there any comic book people in the audience?
Yeah.
He's one of the most underrated artists and thinkers of the whole Marvel universe. In fact, I mean, Stan Lee, nothing to take away from Stan Lee, but Stan Lee could not do any of the stuff he had done without Kirby, because Kirby invented so much. His style wasn't about, he got information from Stan Lee and then he drew it. This guy just was in his own world, and there was something about it. But he also had a signature way of drawing the figure, and some people made fun of it because they were kind of chunky, or they were like not as realistic in some ways. But I really thought it was really effective for a spacesuit. And so I kind of like borrowed a little bit of the quality. I'm no Jack Kirby, so they're not strictly Kirby-esque. But I also like just the way he would make up centerfolds. You know, he would take a photograph of something and he would put figures in it. And I started thinking in a similar way. So yeah, just by osmosis, you know.
I'm showing this because it shows that spacesuit.
Yes, so these are the earlier ones before they became the white suits. There was more of this pale blue and then pale green.
And then I was looking at this too. We've been talking about demolition, but then
that was part of it, yeah.
That background that you're seeing with Kirby's work, it seems
that's
like
a nice painting right there.
Yeah, another nice painting. But that action that maybe, to me, I mean, I don't know as much about comics as you or other people in the audience, but I'm seeing that action scene.
Well, it's, so because I'm full of absorbing whatever, it's not just strictly comic book, because comic books are really fragmented narratives. It's kind of like comic book character building, and then this idea of painting, you know. I'm thinking about, well, how does smoke look with this method, you know, on paper? And if I were to do these washes in the background, and where would all the pollution gather? You know what I mean? Like, there's this stuff to it that are of physics that are not really generally attributed to this kind of line quality, if you were. So I guess in some ways I was just kind of like mixing up the methods, you know, to create some kind of effect.
I want to show
It's a nice
painting. some more examples of your influences and some of the things that you've done with them. So this is one of the works that's in the exhibition. Katrina Girl, You're on My Mind.
Yeah.
So this is a full life-size scale screen. I mean, I'd love for you to talk about that, but I'm also putting it maybe in conversation with this.
Yes.
We had talked about Chinese scrolls and storytelling and movement, and just those two, whatever you want to share.
Well, by the time I'm at this point in my work, it's I've emptied out quite a few things. You know, the color palette is definitely way low register. It did start off as a kind of like abstract, not kind of, it was a totally abstract painting that had no thought of what it was going to be. You know, I started off as like a Rorschach kind of moment where I create a condition and then I find the probabilities, right? And then once I get one element, it kind of directs it. And so I think I may have just put in one of the red buildings or something like that. And then with the Katrina stuff all in the news and was just happening, it's like, it just had to be about that. You know, I just like, I turned in that direction. And it's a tricky thing because I hadn't been doing anything topical that was a current affair up until that point. And I did this painting shortly after it happened.
This is 2006.
Yeah. It was like right in the middle of it, and no other artist was doing anything related to it. I had not seen. And it just started building itself, you know. It felt psychically like coming about in a certain way. The trick for me was the ingredients. Like, okay, I'm not going to paint New Orleans. Like, I can't paint a particular place. It wasn't like one-to-one. I had to bring an idea, kind of like a prop-esque moment that was more like a play, you know, a play on disaster, a play on past events as well. Because to me, the trauma of the event wasn't so much that it happened then, but that there was a whole bunch of neglect way before this happened, that this happened. You know what I'm saying? And so it needed to be a painting about a longer time period. And the only way to get away with that is to not hold it to a contemporary look too much. You know, to like, oh, that's when that happened. You know, it's kind of like, without the title, you wouldn't know what it was. You would see it as maybe a flood or some kind of thing like that. And so for me, it was very exciting, you know, because I want deeper time, right? But when I saw stuff on the news, like people waving American flags on roofs, I'm like, wow, yeah, again? So I was, you know, it's call to action, I guess, in a certain way. And, you know, I was looking at a lot of Chinese court painting, horizontal stuff, not vertical scrolls, not that kind of stuff, but way wide, I mean, even wider than this. This is like a very simplified painting, but stuff that would go like 25 and 30 feet, 35 feet long. I mean, we're talking like a panoramic, a filmic moment. You know, I saw a movie there. I saw also an atemporal space, like all time was happening in one line. It was amazing freedom. And so also the style, the line, it was akin to my aesthetic, but their palette was also bare, and reds would pop up quite a bit, and ochres and so on. But it allowed this staging that I'd longed for and didn't know it. It broke me away from the square and the rectangle, and all the tensions that you know was about. And I did more of them. So we got this one, and there's one at the Berkeley Art Museum I have there called The Promised Land, which is that's a good painting.
And they're both screens.
And they're both screens.
Yeah.
They're doors. These are doors.
Okay.
So I figure, like, you know, the original ones in China are made out of silk and just fine everything, right? But, you know, I had to go to Home Depot for mine. So, but the thing is, these doors are perfect because they take the material really well. But I condition the surfaces to a point where I can get these effects. You know, surprisingly, they worked really well. I don't know where that idea came from, but I just went with it.
So I want to look at some more influences of yours. But I want to stop and see if you can talk more about temporality, because the whole premise of these works, as I understand it, is that Black people are going to leave Earth.
In the paintings?
Yes. There has to be another way, there has to be another place, there has to be another time in which we can exist in a state of liberation.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why we have these UFOs. That's why we have these super robots. This is why Oprah is piloting the ship, right? Like, these are pioneers. These are pioneers who are going to another land to try to create something that doesn't exist here. And yet, at parts, they're creating a parallel universe, right? So that things that are happening on Earth are also happening in some time and space, right? In this other universe. And I would just like to hear you talk about your thoughts about time, or how you think about leaving one place and the possibility of things being different, and how things follow you or things continue on across time.
Well, that's a hard question. You guys know that, right?
But it's true.
Well, E equals MC squared. No. Well, you know.
Is there a space of Black liberation in your work?
Well, because I like to pivot my position as something that happened from the rupture of slavery, and trying to figure out the healing parameters, or at all healing from that, without the country backing it, right? You don't have therapists or any psychological term for those horrific situations that have happened to Black folks. So we're kind of left to our own, you know, demise to figure it out, which is a very difficult thing to do when there could be ramifications, you know, from generations and generations. I think the kinds of spaces, here's the thing, I think I want to create space. So there's no space yet, right? And so in some ways, these works are creating space that hadn't been allowed. You know, like the 40 acres and a mule, who got that? You see what I'm saying? So, so I have to make it, you know? So the atemporality of it, or the timelessness of it, is to be familiar and exact, to approach something that we all understand and know about, and to have an option to look at it differently. And then there's the abstract of it, like, I don't know where the hell this part is, you know, but it is a part, because before I had no ability to say I had parts. I had no ability to look at healing, right? I didn't know I was sickened in a way that healing was necessary, but we do know that there are traits of trauma still there in Black culture because of the fact that it wasn't allowed a specific healing process, you know. You don't just free people and say, go ahead and do what you gotta do. Well, we already know when they burnt that town in Tulsa.
Yeah, Tulsa, yeah.
I mean, when I look at that, it's heroic that Black folks made that without permission or insight to do it, except to do it themselves. Like, that's powerful to me, right? That's making space. But then, when we went ahead and did that, it got destroyed. So a lot of these moments that I feel like I'm making a space, I guess, in a way where sometimes it's very unsure, because I don't know the there-ness of it yet, you know? And so for me, I think a lot of us needing to heal is kind of like, we just need to stare at it a little bit longer. You know, just like when I stared at those images of, you know, of the happy dark, I mean, it's like I had to stare at that and look through it. I couldn't just ignore it and pretend it didn't exist. I had to go through it in a way. But I'm not going to claim that, you know, the timelessness is something that I strategically always thought about when I made the work. They just happen to be part and parcel of the process of discovery, you know. But when I was looking at like the Apollo space program, and I, you know, it just looked fun, right? It's like, it's like, well, black folks don't get this kind of fun, you know, we don't get this. But then when it got to the moon, it was like, oh, possibilities. Like maybe this whole thing can be redone on like neutral ground now, you know what I mean? And so I guess in a certain way I'm looking for unencumbered spaces to make choices, to reflect, to be calm, to be spiritual, to be a human, you know, in short.
Yeah, thanks. That was really helpful. I mean, you know, because it's so helpful to hear from the artist. You know, the artist are, and I have my job, but you are, you know, you're the source of the magic. And I'm just showing this because I wanted people to see these 3 portraits. You're seeing the Traumanaut, but they're not, you know, they have human faces now, that there's been this healing process that you're talking about, that there's some kind of transformation that's happening. And I also wanted to point out, and we've been talking about this for years, Oakland green. I mean, that's the accent color for the exhibition. And in one of the galleries here at MoAD, there's this wall where there's a number of different smaller pieces, but the background color is Oakland green. And I just want you to say something about that, the significance of that for you.
Well, when I was really young, I think we're talking like late 60s, I would go with my mom to some friend's house or some antique type junk shop that she knew a woman there, and my mom was really into old dolls and stuff, you know. And every time we went there, there'd be this green color in like the bathroom or something, and it was just like, for me it was very oppressive because I didn't want to go to these places and see half this stuff. But it just became a reoccurring color, like in all these places. And you know, when you're young, you have attitude, and you don't know how to like really. You're open to what you think you want. You know, everything should have sugar on it. So later on, as I look at it, this impression that was left was a kind of aura of like, I don't know, black presence for me. You know, I just saw, and then sometimes you'd see like some old house where the paint was peeling and you see green underneath. I was like, there it is. There's that green. And I just think it was a common color in the 30s or 40s or something. Maybe 30s, I don't know. Does anybody know about this kind of pale emerald green? Yeah, maybe appliances were that color too. Yeah. They had some appliances that color. But that's as deep as I got with that.
Right. But I do associate it with, for some reason, maybe because of my conversations with you over the years, I think about it as like an institution or a color of the city somehow in public buildings. It was the color of oak.
I mean, I felt like whenever I start seeing the paint chipping and seeing the green, it just made me think of that everything was like that at one point, you know.
In your childhood in Oakland.
Yeah, it was just like a little, like a moment of discovery, like, oh, it's under a lot of paint here. And it probably happened in a lot of other cities too.
So I know we're running short on time. This is one of the stars of the show. And
that's a painting right there, you guys.
And I wanted to bring it up. We all agree, I think, that this is a great painting. There's a lot going on here. And I also was thinking about it in relation to this. We had talked about the influence of ancient Egyptian papyrus. Painting is another kind of form or narrative for presentation or storytelling. And whatever you want to share with us about this brings out your love of Black history again.
Well, I mean, when I was reading Sheikh Anta Diop, the seminal book was called The African Origin of Civilization, which became required reading in some institutions, in mostly Black colleges. It was just a way to, like, there's all this, when I was growing up, you know, pyramids were built by aliens, you know? And like all the technology or genius of what was happening on the continent of Africa got pushed over to either Europe or aliens. And I just thought, wow, this is very hostile, you know. My gosh, you know. And you know, took it in a very matter-of-fact way, like, no, it's thorough blackness, right? And as I took that position, then I looked at genius in a general way, hidden. And so for me, the sideshow piece, which this is called, was to cite this contemporary hot rod kind of rodeo car sport that black folks had made up in Oakland, West Oakland in particular. And then it started spreading globally, and it became a topical painting, and I started doing these panoramics in that way, you know, more topical in that sense, that they could be about the contemporary stuff that's going on today. Where I wanted to merge, you know, these two cities, so it's basically Oakland and Los Angeles is kind of what it is, you know. But I discovered these marks on the streets, you know, one day I come into my studio and I was like, God, this looks like a Bryce Martin painting, you know. It was they were done beautifully, you know. I'm sure it was terrible hearing all that and being up in the middle of the night and seeing this, but it just looked like it was a record of real interesting, like, activity. And so I started looking more into that, and I decided to make my own idea on it. And so these cars are different. These are like muscle cars and stuff that are very expensive that you may not see them doing all this kind of stuff with, because this kind of activity, you know, your car can really get tore up, a lot of banging and stuff. But yeah, I mean, so, you know, looking at the court painting concept really opened the delivery of what can happen in the space. I wish we had a real different, I mean, that actually is
so
not,
many,
this is really not the great example of what court painting is.
You were looking at much longer ones.
Longer ones where you see
cinematic.
even the emperor might be in it, there's archery happening, it's just like amazing. It's like it just gets bigger. It's like, because right now we're sitting and we've edited and composed our moment, but you go next door, there's something else happening, something else, and so you do that, you know, a million times, you just get this huge expanse of activity that's like coexisting, you know.
I'm going to push this forward in the narrative. This is a great painting that is showing that exploration with the innards that you were talking about, but it's outer space. You have the trauma smiles are still going on, and there's this exploration. So I have the painting and then a detail. And then I had this, which I took this picture. This is how long we've known each other. And then in the background,
like
some smaller samples some smaller samples of some of those exploratory abstract spaces.
Well, I'll do like, you know, 30 of just, you know, I got to get used to the material and push it around in order to understand what to do with it. So, you know, I have a lot of work that, in fact, half of this show is work that's, you know, made around probably stronger works in some ways. Not all of them, like the side show. There's definitely seminal works for me in here, but I feel like I've done a lot of some on certain ideas that, you know, I just made a ton of stuff. Like I was talking to someone today, and they was like, well, why did you choose, why did you choose these works? I said, well, I had so much of it, you know, even after I'd sold various ones, I still had all this stuff left over because it's just the way it is. You know?
It's a lot of work. I mean, you're totally.
Well, I needed to understand, and, you know, as an artist, you're always experimenting, right? And you're trying to find the right notes. Like if you're a musician, you're trying to figure out, you know, the structure of what you're up to, and you don't want to just be there repeating other people's stuff. So I'm, you know, I guess generally there's a sense of that's my painting. That painting.
Well,
okay. So that's my last.
This is why I want to show
painting.
This is the kind of end of this part of the narrative of space exploration where we have is this right? It's the last Traumanaut leaving space, going into a space.
It's a self-portrait.
it's a self-portrait of you leaving that moment in your that body of work.
I go in that ship and I take off. I go through the black hole and I come out an abstract painter.
Very helpful, everybody. Yeah.
Atemporal, y'all. Atemporal.
Where is this painting, David?
SF MoMA owns that.
All right. And I wanted to show it in this context. This was a really beautiful show that happened.
That was right out here.
Yeah, here at MoAD in 2015 with Kara Walker, Ika Shinobare, Lorna Simpson, and Robert Cole Scott.
What company? Oh my gosh.
Awesome. Yeah.
That is that's amazing.
So that's the end of the narrative. And I'm moving towards, what happens next. You said you're coming out an abstract painter.
Picture. I like that shot right there.
Yeah, it's a good shot.
Great.
This is an installation shot here, and I wanted to, because you're talking about that black hole as a self-portrait, right? So you had NASA make this suit for you.
Yes, Apollo 11 suit made by NASA.
And then you have this video. This is just a still from the video that's here. Can you talk a little bit about this?
So when I looked at many different things to find my poses, and I would do drawings of those poses, and quite often those poses would urge me to think about how to use them, whether it be in a particular narrative or suggesting a narrative. And I asked, I was looking at images online, and then I came across this one image of the suit, and I thought, oh, it's a really nice, very contemporary image. And I clicked on the website, and it was NASA's replica website, or they had a replica department, and it said for sale. I was like, what, for sale? So I emailed. I called them. You can call. We used to talk to people on the phone. You call. It was no recording. I talked to a person, and they say, yes, we make these. They take a long time. They're all hand done. We have 3 different ones we offer up. So there's like the ground cheapest one, which is the one I chose. And then there's a middle one which had like a few extra accoutrements. And then there was a one that was really the one that they used. And I'm like, I'm not really going to the moon, so I don't need it. And that was like 10,000 or something, Yeah. I didn't have it, so it didn't matter because it was a heavier suit. I wanted something light. And so I gave them the specs of what I wanted, and they made the thing, and I remember getting it. It was like Christmas. It was a trip. It took a long time for them to ship it. So I put it on. I took photos, and I was originally going to, like I said, use it for posing. But then on my camera, I had the video part on it, and I decided to do a little video. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. This reminds me of a real sci-fi kind of thing. And we used to go to the Sierras every summer, my wife and I, and so in the back where we were staying in these cabins, there were all these trees, and a lot of them were marked for cutting down. And I said, oh, this would be good. I'll do the tree hugging thing. I'll just start hugging trees. Hugging trees are cool. Anybody like hugging trees?
Yeah. That's half the audience, yeah.
So I put on this thing, and my wife's dad didn't know I brought this. He had no idea I was up to anything. So I literally put the thing on the tripod. I had my wife, Janine, turn it on while I come down. And it was funny because, lots of takes. I'm not an actor, so it took me a while to get it, right. But eventually it just turned out, I took my time. There was times when the visor, the shield would just sweat up and get up and turn sideways. And it's like, oh man. And then I finally got the right moment, and there it was, Traumanaut tree hugger.
I mean, this brings the self-portraiture back. I mean, it's so cool that you got a NASA suit that you get to perform as a Traumanauts. You're appreciating nature here, but imagining what it was like for them to explore.
Well, I thought it was sorry to interrupt.
No.
I thought it was a perfect alignment of so many topics of interest. Like it was going to be about this kind of existential moment of human beings on the planet Earth and how we're distant from it. You know what I mean? And also the alienation of just being, African American. Alienation was further increased with the suit, and I just saw this as a perfect device of like recognizing that, And at the same time, the suit is also a performative subject to, we expect that suit to look for stuff, right? We expect the suit to be on an adventure. So it creates an interesting protagonist, which is what I wanted ultimately. And to do it in film was so satisfying. I mean, once I did, I was super excited. So if you guys have not seen it, I added music to it that it hadn't had music since its conception. It just had basic nature sounds, but now I put some sci-fi mood music on it, and it really,
It's great. It's awesome.
works. Please check it out.
So in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to try to help us find out what happens after you go through that door. And you come
What
out an
door?
the abstract painter, right?
You mean the black hole?
Yes, the black hole. The door of the
Who
shuttle.
makes a door a black hole? No,
This shuttle door
Oh,
closes behind
Yes.
you, and then you take off.
that door, yes.
So I wanted to show some of the basketball abstractions. This is work that you did with Paulson Press
Yes.
here in the Bay.
Yes, we did a great collaboration. It's funny thing about doing the 3 prints with them is that the prints we made are so unique in how they turned out. I couldn't have done them deliberately in painting. I was surprised at that. I mean, collard greens in particular, do we have
I don't think so.
Okay, we
I
have rainbow.
These two.
rainbows? Oh, that's nice. I
Yeah,
love how that turned out.
That's a lovely print.
It's the bareness of rainbow, right? It's kind of like you're not sure if it, well, mostly it's about a rainbow that's faded. And for me, it was more like that's the kind of rainbow that seemed to make the most sense. You know, more of a faded rainbow.
And can you talk a bit about, I mean, here we're seeing you setting up the basketball net with the print. Can you tell people about why the basketball net? How do you go
so,
from-
well, first there were the actual basketballs, and in a lot of the paintings, which none are here, I don't think, in the show, I did a whole series of paintings where the Traumanauts are playing basketball or they're building basketball pyramids. And I did a show at the Arts Commission. May there, who was the director, had told me that she suggested we do a real pyramid out of basketballs, which I up to this point only did it in painting form. And just the possibility that that could happen was really a trip. It was like the video moment, you know. It brought the 2-dimensional thought world into the physicality of 3-dimensional world, and it was just like a fun thing to do. So it was also a singular sculpture, so it didn't have all the landscape and the figures around it, and that became very evocative to me. And I was like, oh yeah, there are these states of experience when things are only the material or only the atmosphere and not the story. And so when I did the Black Hole and the Traumanauts Uncertain Journey, that's the full title, it was like I took on the idea of that. I took that challenge, you know, to take the basketball, which had already been in the narrative paintings, and to create an abstract painting with it. You know, it was a kooky idea. Most people hated it. My gallerist at the time couldn't stand it. It was a moment of isolation for me because people thought I was just a basketball fan, and they still think that. They always go, "Do you like that team? That team did this." And like, who did what? When? I'm like, yeah, I like the Warriors. Don't they play here? I mean, I'm not a sports connoisseur. I do like the Warriors, and I played basketball as a kid. You know, I think that was a general.
You have a painting in the stadium, right?
And I have a really big painting in the stadium at Chase Center. But it was more about it was a challenge in a way, kind of like, I don't know if you know, when Robert Colescott did this like hot dog painting where he did a mountain of hot dogs. It's a weird painting. He did this hot dog painting. It was like as silly as heck, right? Like, who wants to see a bunch of hot dogs in a painting? But Robert Colescott. And that wasn't the reason why I did it, but it had this certain kind of thought. Like, I just was after so the black hole is an implied concept. During the time I painted, there were no images like they have now, right? It's all theoretical. generally. And so it was like, I really was compelled to think about an effect and an experience, and that was it. And so I decided to make these, what I call like particle paintings, which I just took these small form of the basketball, and I would either change the palette to suit a certain concept, like, so Dark Matter was a series I did, and all I had done was like think about a range of values to make this painting, and they were all going to be these little basketballs. Do we have an image of any of them?
I have one of those.
Okay. Anyway.
I have this. This is at the Studio Museum of Dark Matter.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing some, so for me, I did some Dark Matter paintings earlier, but they're interesting. They're not that bad, but I felt like I was just more interested in a viewer and then experience. I was just more into that. But at the same time, I wanted to carry this kind of loaded content of African American culture, which also is a kind of stereotype, but it isn't the happy darky stereotype. It's more like a speculative stereotype, you know. In some ways, I feel like basketball is kind of like a black ballet, if you were, about you know, thinking about all the amazing things that some of these players do. You know, they really do some magical things that are pretty astounding. And I feel like it's just an identity connection, right? And when I started doing the networks, which was very unexpected, I just ended up with a full range of a concept of abstraction, you know, by utilizing this urban vernacular. So that was, for me, it was kind of like a Pollock moment too, even though no one's told anyone about it. But I find that they have a certain kind of attribute though, you know, a kind of urban discovery, which also operates in this language of abstract painting history.
Right, because they don't necessarily, I mean, they're all different. I'm only showing one, unfortunately, but
Yes,
they're all different,
right,
and they don't
right.
necessarily read as a basketball net. If there's,
No, they definitely
they're
lose
abstract, and
their
then it's
definition,
like,
yeah.
oh, it's a basketball
Right,
net. Then it's like
right.
an added layer of interpretation.
Sure, exactly.
Okay, I'm moving on to some more recent things. I wanted to show this because this was in All Power to the People, or this
Yes.
was at the Oakland Museum.
This was in like All Power to People, and then that last show at the Oakland Museum.
The Motherland,
Motherland
show, Voyage into Afrofuturism.
Yes, yes.
MLK.
That's.
So it's a great painting.
That's a
Is that what you're gonna say?
I love this
Yeah.
painting. Yeah, I love
This
it.
is a detail.
Yeah.
I wanted to show, this is coming up to 2021, and this is your mom, who's this lovely
In
person,
1968.
character, influence in your life,
Mhm.
Black nationalist hero. So there she is with one of her flags that she made for the Black Panther Party for
Yeah.
self-defense. And then the flag in an exhibition that you did called David Huffman Afro Hippie, that was
Yes.
at the Berkeley Art Center
Mhm.
last year.
Yes.
That was just last
Fun
year,
show,
right?
really fun
Really
show.
fun. Here's an installation shot.
Look at that, you guys.
That was an awesome show. Yeah.
That was a really fun show.
And
I want to
really-
do another pyramid, but bigger.
And autobiographical,
Yeah.
right? Because we've got pictures of you and Bobby Seale in the back.
Mhm.
You know, this flag from your mom. Then this had video inside, this door that we're looking into. It's like, reminds us of the mothership, you know, with
Yes.
Parliament Funkadelic.
Yeah.
And then your own works in the background.
Mhm.
I'm going to come back to this. I wanted to show this. This was the show that Elizabeth mentioned at the beginning, The Artist's Eye, and these are just my photos that I took
Yeah.
of you and the work that you have there. If you would say anything about this curatorial experience.
Yeah, so this was
now.
my first curatorial debut, and maybe Lava's too?
Yeah.
Yeah, we worked for 2 years on this project, and it was fantastic. I mean, you know, we each had a room, and we each got to think about the kind of art in their collection for what we wanted to do. And of course, I had like 107 pieces, and I think we ended up with 15, right? But it was so much that I hadn't curated before, so I just like, I kept picking stuff. That's good. Yeah,
all
why not?
from the museum's permanent collection.
Yeah, from their permanent collection. And there are some helpful hints about like, maybe, no, let's try this and try that. And it just got tougher when it came to the bareness of what we ended up with. And I was like really feeling like I lost some friends, you know. But ultimately, when it was done, I felt like this was right, you know.
That's
but
great.
Because I'm not a curator, it was more risky for me emotionally, you know. But yeah, putting in some great artists. But there are some other works in there that I really wanted in there, but would have made it way too crowded. If I had seen more black art, I would have had more opportunity to think about what I could do, what I could make. And so I wanted the viewers and other people that maybe might, you know, that might be in their teens or what have you, see these other possibilities, you know, at least just for that moment. But yeah, it was very fun to do.
That's
Very
awesome,
fun.
yeah. And again, that's still up until
Till July
17.
17th.
July 17th. Okay, great. Thank
Yeah, we
you.
have a catalog coming out, right?
Yes.
I hope so.
Yeah,
A
we
softbound catalog. They said it wasn't a catalog. They said it was
A brochure.
a brochure,
Slash
magazine,
thing,
slash.
yeah.
I'm just going in, there's more to say. I mean, we could have had the whole talk about the selections you put into that show.
Yeah, no, we don't
But
have to.
I wanted to just show where you are now, what your work
Mhm.
looks like now, because it's continuing to develop. It
Yeah.
doesn't look like what's in the show here.
No. Yeah.
And still very topical. You know, we
Mhm.
started off thinking about at some point Katrina,
Yeah.
right? And here, this is this work, George, for George Floyd, 846.
Yes.
The time in which that passed for him to die.
Yeah, that was the early time, because the real time is like 9 minutes and 10 seconds or something. It's longer.
Okay.
But that was the urgent moment of thinking of someone having, you know, their breath, their oxygen being cut off for that long. It was just crazy,
Mhm.
you know.
I'm going to show another example of work in this style, just so people get a sense of where
Yeah.
you are. Sunrise Dream Part 2. This is from this year.
Just a recent piece. So BAMFA has the first part of this. So I did Sunrise Dream Part 1 and Part 2, and Part 1 is in the BAMFA show.
And this is a detail.
Yeah. So this is not a detail of that painting, but
Oh, I thought this was.
he's in this though. He
Okay.
definitely is in there. You're
Alright.
right about that. You're right. So, you know, with the last 3 years, maybe 4 years, probably 4 years, I've been working with some reflection of my childhood growing up in Berkeley. The kind of Afro-hippie thing that I did with the show was really the life I've lived. And so you had things happening at Provo Park that would be like music, it'd be congas going on, and it'd be like, you know, you had African drumming with like rock music and folk music, and you had different art. You had like Charles White style figures that were drawn and reproduced, and then you had these hard edge abstraction paintings that were like Joseph Albert-esque color field type things, as well as just jewelry, and then the Panthers selling like red books and hippies, and just like it was amalgamation, you know, and you had your spiritualists over here and your funky folks over there, and it was just like an amalgamation of so many sensibilities, you know. I think for me, the work that I'm doing now, I'm considering some of those qualities, you know. So I guess in a certain way, the stamp, so these are stamps that I either make myself or have made, and I utilize them in a sense that reminds me of when I was a kid, when people used to make pamphlets and posters during, you know, the protest era and the free speech era. They would just hand you these things, you know, and they would be like Xerox in their basement or something, but there was this informality of urgency. And so I wanted to, in some way, reconnect to that. And so this is Eugene Goodman, the police officer at the Capitol riots. Remember that crazy event, right? But he's like the only real figure that I remember in that event. Does anybody remember any other single figure? I mean, like, he's historically pronounced. And I felt like, you know, what he had done, slowing that crowd down and diverting them away from whatever people he had helped, was really prominent and powerful. And so I wanted to utilize him in the paintings in a way that he's like part of the painting. So this is just a section. I'll do things in layers. So I'll put stuff that's politically interesting to me, like whether it be a figure or some symbol like a cotton gin, and then I'll add African cloth, drawing, kind of like gestural abstraction or expressionistic ways of painting, color field. These new ones here that has the Sphinx head is actually my mom's face overlaid with the Sphinx, because my mom always has been told that she looks like the Sphinx has been kind of a running thing in our family for years, and I've always wanted to do something about it. And so eventually I made this thing where it's like, okay, I'm just going to line her up in such a way, and then have her, and take some parts of the Sphinx, and it just merged. And it's funny because my daughter, who's 7, when I first showed, she goes, Grammy Doy, you know, and I just love that. You know, my mom was into that kind of stuff, building pyramids and so on. So I feel like this, in certain ways, is that I'm always interested in pushing painting. I'm interested in history of painting, but I also feel like I have some unique elements of my upbringing that also are topical. In this particular painting, which is called The Awakening, and is also the title of my upcoming show at Miles McEnery in New York in September, has text at the bottom. I don't know, can you guys see that?
It's down here.
Yeah, can anybody read the text? I kind of twist the letters around because I don't want to make it easy to read.
You might have to tell them what it says.
So it says Emmett. And a lot of my texts that I'll add are names of people who have either been murdered by the police or in some racial way, you know, murdered. And Emmett Till is like one of the most horrific murders that we know of in our history when it comes to thinking about these things. And this idea of the awakening is almost a contradiction in terms, because no matter how things get, we don't seem to wake up and do different stuff. We don't seem to, it's almost like we come back to Emmett Till in a certain way. And I don't know if it's about having too many topics happening at the same time that we don't have time to wait and do, but it's just a very curious thing, you know, that awakening is slightly impossible. You know.
Well, I mean, that's a great way to have us think about temporality again, as well as all the formal aspects of your work that, you know, we've been talking about with the fabric that you're bringing in. We have the basketball nets that are part of it. We have the stamps. We have Black history. We have African history. Right, and you know.
And collage. I mean, I'm using a lot of collage.
Absolutely.
And there's glitter in there too. They're really quite striking when you see them in person, because they have surface variety, you know, in such a way that you definitely can take it at different angles. And this one is a much larger piece. It's an 8 by 8 foot on 2 panels, and I really like going big because it sets the person in a way to become a traveler, right? And I guess in a way it's like, I'm going to make you guys all Traumauts soon, you know, as you start looking more and more at these more staged events. And I'm starting to think about actual planets and moons in particular as things to include in the work. And moons are really interesting. Can anyone guess what moon that is up there?
I don't know.
Beautiful moon? Europa. Who said that? You got it. Wow.
Yeah, you need to talk to her. She's got some info. Yeah.
Europa, that's exactly it.
But it's interesting, I mean, just in terms of scale, like you're talking about how big this is, right? That And how you have the paintings that are on doors,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
That they can become portals that we can walk through and do that.
Well, I
kind
mean,
of
I still
journey.
have all that sci-fi thing, and I think it's come back a little bit more again. And it's a strange tightrope that these paintings are performing, because they are abstractions. They are about the paint and the material, but there's a Rorschach kind of countenance, if you will, at moments that lend itself to deep space, relationship that looks like familiar, territory that is kind of outer space is. But I'm not trying to do outer space with them. They just happen to lean towards some of that. So, but when you put a moon or something in it, it definitely sets it up for that kind of read.
Dave, I think we should stop. We could clearly
Yeah.
talk about, I skipped about 30 slides.
Good. Because way too many.
But
Part my hair this way.
but can we just thank David for his time and generosity? Elizabeth, are we doing questions?
I think we're going to skip the questions.
Yeah, okay.
Do we have a?
Really?
Do we have a?
I've never been to a place where they
Oh.
skip the questions.
Maybe we should
Well,
have
okay.
some
There's
questions.
there's too much sadness about it. So all right, we'll have a couple questions.
I just have a comment. First,
Yeah.
I want to say thank you. Thank you
So
much.
fun.
I know your work, but this gives me a real insight into your work and the arc of your work. One thing that I'm really struck by, going from the painting with the hanging black man, and then really watching the evolution of the black body, going into the super robot that has the opening where there's one painting in particular where bombs are coming out and destroying the earth. And then to now where we didn't talk about that. We'll have to have another conversation. Now where the black body, the dying black body, in particular the one that, the abstracted one with George on the bottom, that image now exists in all of our minds. And when you first started at work, the internet wasn't such that, or Facebook, or the way that we all consume images on these various platforms. It's fascinating to me that we no longer need to see a black body traumatized to know, to have a specific image in our minds of what that is in this painting. So that's my
No,
comment.
that's a great observation. I like that.
Do we have another question or comment? Can I come use the mic?
More of a quick comment. Thank you so much and a lot of respect to your work, because you've made it accessible to understand trauma without really having to read history books about trauma. And you've made it accessible in a way that it is tolerable to learn about the term Traumanauts, and then learn that artwork and then go back to what happened really in history. So it is a source of strength to see your artwork. And my favorite character in artwork is the guy who relaxes on the rooftop when everything else is going on.
Right.
So I think that is one of my favorites, and I will follow that character. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you.
Sweet, yeah.
Thank you. That's really great.
I think both of our speakers bring up this great point, because we have part of your evolution, I think, as Lava is saying, is you go from showing that trauma to figuring out a way to refer to it without having to show the body, which has been such a tricky thing for so many artists. How do you make a commentary on something without re-traumatizing the viewer? And by just having George, and then there's this affect that comes from all the abstraction and all the collage, right? And that's what trauma can feel like, is being overwhelmed and not being able to sort things out. and everything all at once, you know?
Yeah.
So it seems like that's part of what you're so generously offering to us and just giving us a word and a time stamp that makes that connection and allows us to kind of maybe see what it feels like.
I'm glad that you said that, because I didn't want to re-involve the horror, you know, because I'd already done so much of that kind of thing already in some manner. But I think also, like when Colin Kaepernick took the knee during people's most leisure day and moment to watch a football game, he showed a political urgency in the middle of that. And I think as much as I love painting, the aesthetics of painting, I think there are these heights of aesthetic experience. I also feel like, you know, my life as an African American male is that I am also living with ideas of trauma. So I feel like I need to include those elements, you know, and it doesn't hold me back. It still allows me to ascend. Yeah.
Cynthia, please.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I love all the layers in your work, and I confess that I have been just reveling in the painterliness.
Thank you.
And I just was immediately drawn to all of the kind of the painterly backgrounds that you provide, and when I look at those backgrounds and, you know, in other works, sometimes I feel like it's cosmic matter, sometimes it feels like toxic matter. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk about sort of the cosmic sheen that some of them have with the use of glitter.
Oh, the glitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like even some of the basketball paintings also have just some of that cosmic sheen, that one in the back.
Yeah.
Especially.
Thanks for your question, and thank you for allowing us to be in your exhibition. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we go. Yeah, I think the glitter part of it is, for me, about atmosphere. You know, I didn't approach it as a way to have it be a separate involvement so much that it needed to include a feeling of what was happening. So like, for instance, in the sideshow painting, the glitter is almost invisible at certain angles, so that you happen upon its liveliness. And I like glitter generally, you know, in some ways to have it, you know, cover a whole bunch of stuff. But to me, it's like having too loud a note, you know, that, you know, eventually I just kind of have to have it sit aside. So I want it to be something that allows you to attach yourself to the painting without being overbearing. It's a tricky thing. I use really fine glitter, and I also apply it when I put the paint down. I don't glue my glitter down. Like most people, they glue their glitter, so that means they're always putting a layer on top of it by itself. But for me, the drying process of the paint needs to push the glitter around to a point where it's dispersed in an uneven way, you know? It's dispersed through the drying time. And so it allows it to be more part of the painting in a different way. Yeah.
I feel like, just for the record, I wanted to say that the show we're in is Cynthia Aurora Granville's show.
Yes.
Just for the record, that we know that that's part of the context of what's going on, that she's the one that asked that question.
Yeah.
And this show, this beautiful show, will be on view here through June 12th. So
Great.
Great.
yeah, so not much more time. Please let people know and tell them to come and see it before it goes away. Do we have any last comments or questions?
One more comment.
Okay.
In that last painting with George,
Yeah.
in the last painting with George, you've offered George and all of us a moment of grace and beauty within that trauma. So although we know what that traumatic event, that horrific event looked like, because we've all seen it, when we look at your painting, that moment is transformed. So
Thanks. No, I'm glad you saw that, because I am not like, again, trying to abuse them, but to give them ascension. Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate it. Well, thank you guys for this really fun time.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Bridget, for
Yeah.
all of your hard work. And I'm not that it was as hard as your work.
Oh, no.
That's true, yeah.
It's easy sitting here.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming tonight. And I appreciate you all being here. We do have a survey that we would love for you to fill out. It's just a QR code that you can take a picture of on your phone as you exit the room. So if you have a few minutes to give us some feedback on the program tonight, we would love to have that. Of course, we would love to have your support of the museum as well. We appreciate you coming tonight. If anybody would like to become a member, support the museum in any way, we welcome that. But most of all, we want people to come and see this beautiful work. So the most important thing you can do is tell people about this show, about David's work, and invite them to come see it as well. Thank you all.
Thanks.